Let's just play a little jazz. Come on. For me, the action is the juice. Fiend for mojitos. Fiend for mojitos. That's why I thought you was cool like that. I'm a cool guy.
Welcome to Framework. I'm John, one of the hosts of Framework, and with me is always the other host of Framework, Al. How are you today, Al?
Doing great.
Indeed, because it's Public Enemies Day today. The Johnny Depp, John Dillinger film that Michael Mann made right after Miami Vice. This is his follow-up, and Johnny Depp film. It is widely regarded as one of his lessers. We have invited to the program today to Mann-Splain with us, Public Enemies, Mr. Brett Blake. Welcome back to the program, sir.
Thank you for having me.
And you do not believe that Public Enemies is one of Michael Mann's lesser films. Am I mistaken on that?
Yes and no.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot right away. Sorry, he has an incredible filmography. You're here to defend the honor of Public Enemies, right?
In certain ways, sure.
Okay,
there will be plenty of things that we can talk about that I think don't work about this movie, but it's one that on balance I do enjoy, and I think if anybody has sort of paid attention to the movies that you've been gracious enough to invite me on to talk about in the past with various directors, I seem to want to talk about some of the dark horse, entries in their filmographies, just because they're the ones that don't often get talked about very much. So I sort of like to lend my support to the ones that are under the radar a little bit.
You're a champion of the common man, the little guy.
That's right. Just like John Dillinger.
Okay. That thing, for starters. Okay. He's just an asshole, right?
Yeah.
He's just a prick. There's nothing good about John Dillinger, right?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Good. Done. All right. That's my big thing. Right. All right. Yeah. So there's a lot to say about this film. There's a lot of things that are kind of have been said, a lot of choices that were made. It is, of course, famous for the digital camera in 1930s aesthetic. Yeah. It is a Johnny Depp film. It has Christian Bale in a prominent role and Marion Cotillard as well. These are all big movie stars, especially at the time. None of them worked with Michael Mann before, and Michael Mann, as we have been saying, has incredible facility with big movie stars. Some of the best when it comes to using them well.
But none of those top three ever worked with him again, crucially, either.
Yeah.
Nope.
I would say, for me, the digital photography is one of the things that has aged the best about this. I think it looks great.
I think it looks fine. I think it looks okay.
There's cold some on it.
Really nice shots, but it strikes me as less obviously weird and off-putting than I think it did in 2009 when movies didn't quite look like this. It's not as noticeable to me now. It's just kind of how movies look now. And as a result, I'm able to look at it more as a Michael Mann shot film, which is a good thing in general. But, does this compare to his best work? I don't think so. Visually.
No. I think visually it compares pretty closely, but narratively and character-wise, it falls short. Is what brings it to this feels very disjointed to me. It doesn't build the way that his movies do. His movies usually end really strong, and there's a nice sort of sequence of the assassination at the end, but it doesn't feel like a sort of inevitable culmination of all that has come before, so much as and then this is how it went.
It feels like a lot had to be cut out of this to me. Like it feels like there had to have been a 4-hour cut. That the script that they shot had to have been much longer than what we actually saw, because I don't think some of the deficiencies are explainable kind of any other way, because they seem like it seems so self-evident to me what some of the problems here are on a character and even a structure level, that you would think at the script level they would have addressed that, and then just because of the pressures of we're putting out a big studio film in the summertime. We have to get this thing to 2 hours and 15 minutes. They just had to chop away a lot of things.
Yeah, one of the giveaways on that is the supporting cast here is really stacked with notable character actors that you recognize and that pop up to say 2 lines and never appear again. And
yeah, you
would think that would only be a positive to have an overqualified supporting cast, but it's actually a negative in this case because it's continually distracting and makes you think like, well, obviously there was a version of this movie at some point that had a lot more Alvin Karpis in it. And right. Had more of like, Purvis's crew or something like they just because people you recognize are constantly popping up and then disappearing forever.
In the last 15 minutes, she's like, is that fucking Lily Sobieski?
Yeah.
Yeah. What's she doing? Nothing, I guess. Okay.
Giovanni Ribisi's in 2 scenes for no reason. And I mean,
he played Alvin Karpis. That's where I'm like, maybe from what I've read about Karpis, maybe he should have been the focus of Michael Mann's Public Enemies movie because he seems like a better fit than John Dillinger actually for Mann's style.
Well, that's the thing. I think that ultimately, I think there are issues with this film. I think ultimately the biggest one is that John Dillinger is just not a Michael Mann guy. Like at the end of the day, he is like the way he's used in the script and the person himself are both like dramatically at odds with the person that Michael Mann understands and likes to portray on screen.
Yeah, that's something we seem to like lead off with in every movie now is just talking about the Michael Mann protagonist and how like this protagonist relates to that and how he fits, either perfectly into it or it clashes with that. And, at some levels, Dillinger is a professional criminal. And that seems to be like right in Mann's wheelhouse. But actually, I think like the ways that Dillinger clashes with this type might make him like he's closer in some ways, but the clashes have the most deleterious effect on the movie overall. Because like he has the flash that's not on like Muhammad Ali's. And there's actually a behind the scenes feature I saw where Mann draws that comparison directly, where he talks about Melvin Purvis as a person and being this very educated, diligent professional that was just totally unprepared to get in the ring with Muhammad Ali when it came to chasing down Dillinger.
Mm-hmm.
But I think with Ali,
well, actually, I think he does quite well.
Yeah, I mean, well, I don't know. I guess he does, but also the cops and feds of this period really got their asses handed to them by these guys in real life. It's pretty shocking to read just like the Wikipedia summaries of how many dozens of cops they killed.
Fair enough. I mean, it's this is sort of the this era of crime fighting is almost a genre unto itself. Mm-hmm. I guess you don't see too many 1930s gangster stories anymore, but it happened all the time back in the day, and there's obvious attempts to redo it that have had lasting significance. The Untouchables being the one that springs right to mind, which is almost kind of I think the tone that a story like this requires a little more bullshit.
A little more.
And look, I want to talk to you guys about the 1930s more later on. But just to stick on Dillinger and Mann trying to make him into a Mann protagonist, there's a way where I think like even with Ali, the distance between the Ali persona and the Mann archetype was so vast that it almost allowed Mann to like more comfortably just drag that characterization towards his pet motifs and his preoccupations and here the superficial similarities with the crime stuff and bank robbing are so heavy that you feel him kind of consciously resisting making this just a remake of Heat in period clothes.
I wish it was just a remake of Heat and period clothes.
Well,
me too.
There's a lot of that in there, but he doesn't you feel him pull away from that. He doesn't really find a characterization of Dillinger to replace the characterization of Neil McCauley with, and he really doesn't find anything for Melvin Purvis to fill the gap of all the stuff that the Purvis character is not doing compared to his other cop, to Will Graham or Vincent Hanna.
It is shocking how much Christian Bale fades into the woodwork in this film. Like
it's bizarre.
I don't know how that is even possible.
I mean, again, unless there is a much longer cut where that fleshes him out, but at least in the cut that we saw that was released, I don't think the movie has any idea of who this guy is. There's absolutely nothing going on with him under the surface, and I think, to me, it's inexplicable that Bale signed on to play this role unless there was a lot more that didn't end up on screen at some point in a draft that he read, because I have no idea what attracted him to this character as we see him in the movie.
He's positioned like Pacino in Heat, essentially. You know, it is cops and robbers in the 1930s. He is the guy who's going to take down the other guy.
Yeah,
and
I think it's totally.
I don't know. He gets blown off the screen by like a weird Billy Crudup performance in most of his scenes.
Yeah.
And you know, it's not even a good Billy Crudup performance, really. And
I don't know. I kind of want to see the movie that Billy Crudup thought he was in, because I think he and Stephen Graham are kind of in the same movie, but it's not this movie.
Well, they're more in Untouchables mode, I suppose.
Right.
But that is at odds with the material they have.
Yes.
Yeah.
With the whole tone of the piece that Mann seems to be going for, it does not really fit what these guys are bringing.
And I think it's totally explicable that Bale would do this, and not necessarily because he saw a script. I think he just was excited about
Michael Mann.
Yeah.
Wanted to work with Michael Mann.
And
right.
Given Mann's track record
Second
up to
lead,
here,
1930s gangsters.
Yeah, you know, I would not blame him for that.
But you'd still think he'd want to find something interesting to play. I mean,
I'm sure he wanted to. I think you're right. I think it got left on the cutting room floor or something.
I mean, going off.
We get that super text at the end that and Melvin Purvis killed himself years later. I'm just like, huh? Why? I what's that even? Why does that matter at all?
Are you presenting that as a wick that took 40 years to burn from here to there? Like what? I don't get that.
I think one of the strangest things sort of relating to Bale is a scene that he is not in, but it feels like, even if it's not factually accurate, like you should have taken dramatic license and put him in this scene, which is the last scene between Cotillard and Stephen Lang, where sort of he's giving her this piece of information. He's giving her Dillinger's dying words. How on earth is that not Bale's character in that scene? Why is Lang's character a guy who's been in, a couple of moments? He's got great presence. He looks great in the movie, but he's not a major character. Why is he the one who's facilitating sort of the only small emotional payoff that is in this movie?
I can only imagine it's because of historical records. That's got to be the reason. It's got to be, right?
But I think in that case, you just have to make the change.
Yeah, that's my best guess. Is like kind of what John was saying, that Mann, for whatever, was unwilling to make the alteration of having Purvis actually be the one who pulled the trigger on Dillinger, and so he thought that meant the person who pulled the trigger needed to be in that scene. But it is so weird when you do a cursory bit of Wikipediaing, as I did during this movie, during the parts where it wasn't holding my full attention, and realize the liberties he did take. Without Dillinger was not the last of these bank robbing gangsters to be capped. He was the first of them. And Babyface Nelson and Pretty Boy Floyd, who's killed in the first act in one scene, were killed after him. And that's such a huge departure for that. I was shocked that Mann would do that. And doubly shocked that if you would do that you wouldn't just let Bale pull the trigger.
Yeah, there's oddness to the, like it seems like they're positioning Dillinger as sort of the last ember of a dying world at times, like
the
like
end of an era.
Yeah, and that is at odds with what really, his death was when the tide started to turn historically. And it seems odd to restructure that way for Mann, especially considering that most of this film is quite accurate historically relative to others, to the detriment of its storytelling in some ways. And the changes that have been made don't really help, unless we just want this to be structured more, with him outlasting his colleagues, which didn't happen. It's odd. Many odd choices made in the adaptation.
Well, I see why you would do that, though. I mean, why you would choose Dillinger as a more charismatic figure than Babyface Nelson. But I don't know. Pretty Boy Floyd, too, seems like he's...
If Stephen Graham plays Dillinger and Johnny Depp plays Babyface Nelson, and you just characterize them in the exact same way, does it matter though? Like, I mean, do we actually give a shit? It's like we were talking about this as if it was a biopic of John Dillinger. It's not at all. It just kind of feels like one. because of some of the structural choices made, and it shares negative things with biopics a little bit. But they don't get into his character at all, really. I don't think they have a firm grasp on John Dillinger at all in this, at least as
well,
presented.
no, it's the stuff they get into is sort of man protagonist paint by numbers stuff. It was
right. But then the stuff that is in direct odds with that, like where he's sort of this Robin Hood man of the people thing that they don't really dramatize in any way. I mean, that's clearly Depp's whole approach to it. It's just like, he's a rock star, he's charismatic and everyone looked up to him. And it's just like, that is not how Mann sees this guy based on every film he's made up to this point. It's he seems to be drug screaming along whenever the film tries to present him in that way, or when it tries to be Natural Born Killers. And sort of tries to present Dillinger as a media darling. Like, first off, I can't imagine a film less like a Michael Mann movie than Natural Born Killers. So, right there, it's not a great fit. And it's kind of just like there's like two scenes when he remembers that that's a theme of the film, where like there's like a reporters with camera flashes interviewing John Dillinger as he walks around, and then like, see, he was a celebrity of the time, and that's how he was treated. He was what a badass, what a movie star badass John Dillinger was, and that's just like, man has no insight.
Well,
no approach to that character at all.
He presents that as somewhat calculated, that Dillinger is aware of that and manipulating. He's not going to take the $50 from the random person in the bank because he's trying to cultivate that image, and he, explains to his gangster counterpart how he cares what the public thinks because he hides out among them and all that. Like, there's a little bit of that in there, but it's kind of subsumed in all the stuff that's just reheated heat stuff, where he's.
In some ways, I think that's kind of the most interesting angle you could explore in a period setting like this. But again, you can just sense there's sort of a relative disinterest in that whole angle on Mann's part.
Yeah.
I think it's Depp's entire attraction to the role. I mean, besides just, I want to be in a Michael Mann film, which I think is probably everyone's number one thing here.
In fairness, I do kind of like him. I do kind of like this performance.
I think he's actually really good in this. I think it's a good performance. Yeah. It just, the movie is not structured to do much with that. But he has some good scenes.
I think for me, revisiting this, the last time I probably watched this was, after it arrived on, Blu-ray and DVD for the first time. So it's probably been 13 or 14 years since I watched this. And what struck me about Depp here, some of it is colored by the fact that in the years since, in the decade plus since, we've seen so much of weird Depp. We've seen so much of Depp leaning on tics and quirks and, fantastical, goofy characters, that to see him playing a guy who just basically feels like a real person for the most part, I found kind of refreshing actually watching this.
Well, he's a little larger than life, but it's not shticky.
No.
Well, yeah, I think Depp's better at a bunch of tics and bullshit, though. I think that's kind of his good things. And but
in the last 10 years, I mean, Mad Hatter Depp, and
he's lost his touch, obviously. But he's riding high at this point. This is a couple years after Pirates of the Caribbean. He probably signs on to this right after Pirates of the Caribbean. Yeah. This is when he's the biggest star in the world, essentially, when this movie comes out.
Yeah, but I think he's like good in the one scene he gets with Bale. And just doing the charming sort of rock star thing. It's just, the movie doesn't totally know what to do with that. And so it's weird. I mean, I don't know. How far into this did you get before you were, John, this directed to you, how far into it for you before you were like, no, this actually isn't going to be one that I'm going to reevaluate right now? Because there's a solid 20 minutes at the beginning where I was like, maybe this one actually rules. Where it's just kind of reheating heat again. And you had the prison break opening functions sort of like the armored car robbery at the beginning of Heat, where it shows his gang operating professionally. And he's got the loose cannon sort of Waingro figure that our good hero, can beat up an exile from the gang for being extra sloppy, or for being extra vicious and too sloppy. And he's, talking about how he doesn't like doing kidnappings, or in the same way that James Caan explicitly rejected home invasions in Thief. And he's got the prison mentor that taught him the ropes of armed robbery, which is the most Michael Mann thing that anybody can have. Of course, he falls in love at first sight, and that's sort of where it starts to lose me.
The decision to fall in love. I mean, that's just such a trope at this point. He's just like, oh yeah, I love you now. You are my girl. Let's go to hell together. And essentially, okay, he's doing his man thing there, and they're both all in on that relationship immediately. I don't know. I'm probably about 45 minutes in. I'm just like, this is not hanging.
I think it's when Purvis enters the picture for me. Or at least
Purvis's entry is okay though. The shooting the guy in the high grass. That's kind of a striking image to get to start.
The openings, yes. His introductory scene is totally fine because it's like that could be Vincent Hanna's opening introductory scene in a 1930s context, and then it's like right after that is when I feel like Michael Mann realized mid-stroke, like, okay, I've done too much Heat stuff already. We have to now make sure that this is not just Vincent Hanna and Neil McCauley all over again. And I don't know. I think in hindsight, the thing about Heat was that, or at least in this context, that Dillinger is the criminal, but he has Vincent Hanna's flamboyance and sort of personality, and Purvis has Neil McCauley's sort of cold professional asceticism to him. And maybe just flipping those things around would have been enough to just kind of redo Heat in a different context. But again, you just feel him pull away from that and then not have anything else to fall back on, really.
I think there are other angles that could have distinguished it. Even if you were going to sort of invert the Heat dynamic, but still sort of roughly play out that same kind of story, there are other angles you could have explored here that are kind of in the movie, but not really expanded upon at any length. Like the idea that both the sort of the fledgling FBI and the gangland criminal underworld sort of are not happy about all these bank robbers that are drawing all this attention, because it's ultimately whatever the FBI decides to put in place to go after them is going to be used to go after organized crime. And there's a story you could tell in there somewhere. But again, this movie is either not interested or was interested and it got cut out.
Yeah, we glance over the top of that most interesting part of it, which is the actual organized crime turning on these, romantic outlaw figures, at least as they style themselves.
That would have been something, I got to think that is it. I mean, that there is a much longer cut of this that holds together better, but I don't know. It's for some reason I'm at arm's length from this thing from very early on. Really, it's. I think that once Billy Crudup's performance shows up, which is so at odds with everyone else on screen, especially his scene partner Christian Bale, that it seems like this is going for a thing. I don't think this is working, and no one's really popping. There's no character that I'm really drawn into, and yeah, it feels like people trying to figure it out, and in kind of different things. Like I said, Stephen Graham and Billy Crudup, at least they're going for something here. Stephen Graham has done this performance many times. It works in some contexts, not so much in this one. Kind of just waiting for him to get killed in this film. And Crudup doing this weird heightened robber baron thing that I don't even know how to like. It seems like he's trying to imply everything there that is publicly known about J. Edgar Hoover in a film that has no use for most of that.
Yeah, that's probably true. The only bit I like with him, the phone call where Bale is saying we can't get the job done, and he's trying to reject that, but Bale keeps reasserting his failure. I like that scene, but okay, that's one of the things though is again it kind of like I'm saying that I feel Michael Mann wanting this to be about these incredibly skilled criminal operators, or like new, skilled police officers, because that's what he's into, professionals who are very good at their jobs. Except,
but these guys weren't.
Yeah, none of these guys were. Their methods are not like. There's one scene at the beginning, right after the Prison Break, right? Where they're like, hold up, and Dillinger is meeting with like an armorer and talking about like his Tommy gun, like it's pulling up into the right. We got, okay, I'm gonna take out this spring and do this, and then this guy's brought cars for them to evaluate for like, oh, this one's gonna be like, this is your fast car, blah blah blah. It's all like this is straight out of Heat stuff, and I'm just like, this, I just don't buy this in this context. The criminals. It's not that they're really good at being criminals. It's that the cops suck so bad at being cops.
I mean, there's something to be said for like we're just still figuring out what the FBI is and how this works.
Okay, actually, here's my big thing about Public Enemies on this, because it's about the 1930s / the 1920s. This whole period that I just don't really like. It has a time period, and I think it's because we suck at everything in this. Like it's a time frame where it's too modern to be exotic. Like they have all the stuff that we have that makes it the modern era modern, but it's just crappy versions of everything. Like the music sucks. We have guitars. We got guitars and everything, but rock and roll has not been invented. Hip hop definitely has not been invented. So it's just a lot of "Hello, my baby," "Hello, my darling," and scatting. Is anything worse than scatting? Once you have actual rapping to compare it to, and then it goes like, it's everything, man. Like the cars are these big ugly boxes, and the phones are the stupid things where you have like to hold a bell on a string up to your ear, and you look like an idiot. And the women's fashions look silly. The suits are okay on the men, but the people like box with their fists held up and they're bent backwards towards their own faces, like the Notre Dame mascot. Like the best athlete in the world was an obese alcoholic that was played by John Goodman in the biopic. You know. So this is what Public Enemies crystallized for me. Is that I just don't believe that, because Michael Mann's all about people who are really, really good at their jobs. And I just don't believe that anybody was very good at anything in the 1930s. Like, it took until like after World War II, I think, before anybody's training in anything was worth a damn. Like, before that, there's just a whole lot of people confidently guessing at what like might worked one time, kind of.
I mean, the Depression is also rocking the country, so there's extracurricular reasons for that as well. Like it's, but yes,
I can't argue with a lot of that. Although I will confess, I do take a little bit more of a romantic view of that era than you just did, but that's fine.
I'm just saying, you put Babe Ruth on a minor league baseball team today, and he's getting cut in a week.
I will say. At least as it relates to, I guess, this movie and also sort of gangster type pictures of this general era. Like, I've always had a fascination with sort of the Prohibition, Depression era crime period. Ever since I was a kid, I grew up in northern Wisconsin, and there's quite a bit of history up there sort of relating directly into that. I mean, like, Al Capone had a compound like 12 miles away from downtown where I grew up. So I was sort of steeped in some of this lore, and the shootout that we see at the lodge, the Little Bohemia Lodge, like that was like a mythical, legendary event that I would hear about growing up. And I've actually been there. I've seen the bullet holes. I've seen all that stuff that they sort of have preserved from that night. And so there's something that is appealing to me about this movie because it's depicting sort of that aspect of something that I grew up with. And, you know, that's a very subjective, personal connection to this movie, simply because it's sort of detailing something that is so regionally focused. And, you know, growing up in Wisconsin, you don't get a lot of movie connections like that. Now that doesn't make this a good movie, but it does mean,
I know what you mean. Like, even like living in Chicago present day, like there's still a local pride in the connection to that era and that type of criminal. And I haven't been to the Little Bohemia Lodge, but that sequence in the movie is by acclamation the highlight of the movie, I'd say.
Yeah.
I think it's terrific.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All the action scenes are competent, at least. You know, they're all solid.
I also think the shootout that we see sort of in the street before the lodge sequence, I think Dillinger sort of gets nailed in the shoulder, he's shot, and then they head north. I was actually able to visit the set where they shot that as they were setting up to shoot it. They actually shot that in Oshkosh while I was attending the University of Wisconsin, Oshkosh. They shot a lot of this movie in Wisconsin, actually. But so I was able to see how they transformed, multiple blocks of downtown Oshkosh into 30s period appropriate storefronts and stuff. And I was able to watch Mann blocking out some stuff with the stunt team. It was probably like setting up how squibs were going to explode off certain buildings is what it looked like. Didn't see any of the stars, but so I guess that's another kind of personal connection to the movie, that like it was being shot in places that I was actually at. And again, that's a very Wisconsin type reaction. You guys, New York and Chicago, you guys go past locations where movies were made every day. We don't really get too much of that in Wisconsin unless you want to talk about Bloodhook and the giant spider invasion, which I would be happy to do at some point. But I do.
The Shatner one? Is that Shatner?
That's Kingdom of the Spiders.
That's Kingdom of the Spiders. Okay, cool.
Also not a good movie, but
no.
But so there is a cool fascination of seeing like, oh, I actually recognize this. Like I've been in this building that they're actually filming at.
Is there any resentment that goes with that of just like, well, the only way we can get this is if it's like a period movie that's set like
1930s?
We need to go back in time. Let's go see what these hicks are doing.
I don't think resentment. I mean, it's a beautiful downtown, I think. So I mean, to me, it's kind of I appreciate it. There are a lot of sort of these small Oshkosh isn't a small town. I would say it's a small city, but there are a lot of smaller towns in Wisconsin that nobody thinks about that do have these beautiful sort of main street areas that with very little changing look like you're stepping back in time. And I think there's value in seeing, sort of an architectural history of the country when you go into these places. So I like seeing that kind of depicted in this.
No,
movie.
sure. Even like I grew up in Kansas, and there is just a look to some of those towns, that when they're having the shoots outside of the bank, like, yeah, there are small towns in Kansas that's their downtown, like Main Street still looks like that today. And it felt, familiar in that way. And then living in modern day Chicago, I was surprised how much of the stuff that's set in Chicago was actually shot there. I just see like, oh yeah, I guess, yeah, the L train tracks don't look any different than they did 85 years ago. So they're actually, I don't know why I'm surprised a Michael Mann movie actually uses Chicago, because he's very into that, but it still caught me off guard this time. It's kind of like you didn't need to do that. I don't know, you got a whole lot out of it.
He made a concerted effort. I don't know if either of you sort of watched some of the supplemental stuff that has been on the home video releases for this, but he really made a concerted effort to want to shoot in as many of the actual locations as possible. And certainly in the case of like A Little Bohemia, that's pretty remote for a Hollywood production to go up there with big stars and stuff and shoot that. But I think Chicago,
but it's also kind of like you said, they've preserved that around this event that they're shooting, that's right. Now part of the lore of Little Bohemia and part of the tourist attraction draw. So they have tried to keep it like looking kind of similar to what it actually did in a way that random street corners in Chicago have not.
Sure.
I'm a big fan of the tropes and aesthetic of the 1930s gangster film.
Okay.
For
Me
the
too.
most part. I do think though, I don't think it works in this film. And I think it's because it's taking it too seriously. Well, maybe, I don't know. There's a way you could do that. But I'll admit what I want is, basically, I don't want it to get much more serious than The Untouchables, Yeah. I want, copper, you're never going to catch me, see? I want that bullshit, I want, frankly, I want Dick Tracy villains running around, like with messed up faces and stuff. Or at least Jimmy Cagney types, like I want it to be heightened, I guess.
Well, I thought, here, you came into this
pulpy.
sentence, seemed like you were to defend the 30s. And then you said you wanted to be a cartoon, which was a turn.
I like the 30s cartoon.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I like the 30s cartoon version. I think that's a fun aesthetic. And this film has no use for that. So, okay, you're going to do these types of characters as they really were. And it kind of feels like not real, like it feels like you take out the bullshit and then I'm just like, well, why are they kind of dressing like those guys and acting like those guys in some ways, but not others. You know, they're not being cartoonish enough in some way to justify
that.
The Tommy guns and the gigantic cars they're driving around.
Yeah, that is. I guess that's part of what I'm saying. So much of the aesthetics feel cartoony on their own because they feel impractical and like, not. We hadn't invented sleek things yet. You know, the cars are like whatever he talks about. Like, he likes fast cars in this, and then I see him jump onto the baseboards of this wagon that I imagine has a max speed of 22 miles an hour. And like. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's fast if you're trying to run alongside of it, but
but this movie is like it's not really trying to do the real story here. I mean, it is in some way, but it is kind of enamored with the Hollywood version of this guy. You know, the sort of superficial, live fast, die young, Robin Hood crook hero, outlaw folklore, you know, protagonist guy, and that guy just he's such a creation. That, like, you know, you take off the sheen of bullshit that surrounds that archetype, you got to find something human to replace it with. You know, like you can't just. He just comes across as very shallow in this, because it's not leaning into the bullshit, but it's also not replacing it with anything.
To me, that whole thing is, you know, sort of what you're describing. Part of what feeds into that kind of a feeling of a disconnect, at least to me, is the way that the movie looks. Now, I think I'm probably much more harsh than either of you seem to be on how this looks. I think there are a couple of scenes where I think the lighting is actually quite beautiful, and the photography really does work.
Yeah.
There's an early scene where Bale is in the telephone nerve center, you know, switchboard headquarters. That scene is lit in a really interesting, cool way. And then there's the scene where Dillinger has been flown to Indiana and the plane lands, and it's sort of just lit by flares. That's a great looking scene. But beyond that, this whole thing just doesn't really look right to me. And I understand what Mann would have been going for, which is he wants to give the setting an immediacy. He wants the audience to feel like you're actually back in this era. You're not watching a movie about the era. You are there. But it just doesn't have the kind of sweeping texture that I want from this kind of a story. And that leads to kind of a big I guess, I mean, I'm with you, John, in that I want the slightly goofier version of all of this, the slightly more silly, you know, you can still be a movie that can be taken seriously and be a little bit more overtly, I don't know if fun is the right word, but there's just a quality that is lacking here. And that is exacerbated by the look of the picture that I just don't like very much.
I mean, I like the look. I mean, I do think the content lets the form down in a way, and that, like you're saying, the idea is that to put you right there, so you're not watching a movie, except that it's jumping around in time so much and doing these big arch things. You have like the Stephen Grant performance that only makes sense in a movie that. You're still pulled out of it. Like, even if the camera's doing the work to put you right there, there's still too much to pull you out of it and remind you that you're watching a movie. And that creates that sort of odd friction.
Yeah, his performance is like out of Oh Brother, Where Art Thou or something. I mean, it's the same character, right? That's
Babyface Nelson in both. I mean,
right, yeah, okay, that's right. I thought that, but I mean, it's the same performance he gives in Boardwalk Empire.
Exactly the same.
You know, it's
and arguably The Irishman. When he shows up in kind of this key scene in that movie too.
He modulates a little in The Irishman. I wish he did that here, maybe. I don't know. He has energy in Verve, though. When it cuts to him, I'm at least like, well, at least he's yelling.
Yeah, I mean, he's the one who's in the version of the movie that you seem to be advocating for.
Well, he and Crudup. For me, I like what Crudup's doing because it just is so strange and so at odds with the rest of the movie. So I just that in itself, that dissonance, I find interesting and kind of entertaining. You know, when he's
I'm actually really interested in the digital look to this, and not just that, the kinetic camera movements and the quick editing and all this stuff. He did this in Ali too, which is kind of like a little bit further down the line, you know, years wise, but it is still not quite time wise. It works better in Ali than it does here, and I'm curious as to why. is it semiotics entirely? Is it just that the 1930s don't look like this? Why? What is it that is modern about a moving camera or fast edits or this sound effect style? Is it just that we're not used to seeing it with Tommy guns? Is it that simple? Why this feels
part
wrong?
of it. That's part of it, but I think there is a technical component here as well, which is I don't know specifically which digital cameras they shot this on, but anytime the camera is moving, you have a very characteristic kind of smear that is very indicative of digital photography of this era, and I just don't like it. It does not convey, it doesn't scream cinematic to me. It screams, I'm watching something that, if I were seeing it today, I would say somebody shot on their phone. Now, you can shoot movies on your phone that look good. There's something about the sort of when a shot is static, it is ultra crisp. Like that, the early scene, Bale's first scene where he shoots Pretty Boy Floyd. Like you can make out like the individual leaves on all of the trees and stuff that he's running through. But at the moment the camera starts to move, you get this sort of digital blur that occurs, and I do not like that look whatsoever, and that pulls me out of the movie, because then I'm instead of thinking about what's happening in this scene and enjoying sort of the 30s period trappings of it, I'm thinking I don't like how artificial and how digital this looks.
Now, Miami Vice and Collateral both have moments that look like that.
I think it works much better there, but that gets into this idea that I do not necessarily want to see a 30s gangster picture that has that look. And I also think a modern urban setting, which is what you have in Collateral and Miami Vice, it's just sort of the ambient lighting of the sky that these bright cities are projecting when you're shooting there at night, gives those settings such a unique atmosphere that
there's not a lot of neon in 1930s Wisconsin. Sure.
Yeah. You don't get that when you're supposed to be like out in the woods in northern Wisconsin and the lighting looks like something that I would see on a direct-to-video slasher movie. It's just like one harsh, bright spotlight shooting at Babyface Nelson as he's getting gunned down. That's not a scene. Just the look of that I don't like very much.
Well, but it is.
Yeah.
We talk about how, this is like not what the 1930s look like, but that has to be at least, this might be more what the 1930s actually look like than what we're envisioning. It's just not how we're used to seeing that period portrayed in movies. And
sure,
that's a big part of why in Vice and Collateral, it makes more visual sense to us. And
well, does that make this movie experimental then to some extent?
Yeah, but that doesn't mean it works.
A little bit. No.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's experiment. It fails, I guess. I think by popular acclaim, the look of this film is wrong, right? I mean, I think most people look at this and be like, yeah, that doesn't match. That doesn't work.
Like I said, I like it now. I think that was my initial response, was this feels totally wrong for the era and the vibe. And now I've come around to, you know what, this actually looks fine. And it's just the era that is wrong and dumb.
I mean, that could be collaborating as to why this is less good looking than most of his films, though. It's just the things you're looking at.
I mean, for me, that's definitely I'm being, kind of facetious about it, but that is a big part of it, is that these things, I would much rather, I'm not even a big sports car guy, but I would rather look at Crockett and Tubbs Ferrari than one of these boxy Model A's or whatever. And, like down to the guns, and I said, part of this is it's modern photography versus the era. I think it's a clash of Mann's sensibility with the era, in that, he wants it to be about really high-end professionals, but that just doesn't exist this time. The Tommy gun is just not a precision instrument. And so I can't buy that anybody's like the way like an M16 can be, a powerful gun, but also it can buy that somebody's using, is kind of a marksman with it. These guys are really using it in a precision way. And I just don't buy that anybody's a marksman with a Tommy gun.
No, I mean, the way you use a Tommy gun is you lean out of a car and you just spray bullets while you attack.
Yes.
That's how that's.
Yeah, if you don't yell, copper, then it'll misfire after like 3 rounds. It's just how the technology worked. But I think this like sort of all bleeds down into other into the rest of the movie, and even affects some of the structural stuff that we're talking about, because like there's so much of that heat stuff initially, but a big part of the pleasure of Heat is watching them sort of plan out the heist, and knowing all the,
everything they do is
all the
cool.
cool elaborate steps they're taking to counter this measure that will happen. And it's almost like Mann starts with that scene with the guns and the car. Like he starts to do the scene of them prepping for a big bank heist, and then kind of runs up against, oh yeah, but their plan is just to run in there with guns and then run out. Like there's nothing more for them to plan. And so we end up with these bank heist scenes that are actually individually shot really cool and have some great looking stuff in them. But also they seem to pop up at kind of random intervals in the story. There's not like build up to, they were planning to hit this Sioux Falls thing forever or whatever. It's a big thing. I mean, weirdly, they planned the big like train heist that they never actually do in the movie.
Towards the end.
Yeah.
We never see it. It doesn't happen.
Yeah, but that's the one where
but here's 5 minutes. Here's 5 minutes talking about how it's going to work and everyone's share is going to be this.
Yeah.
But thanks for teasing me about this big climactic action set piece that we don't get.
Yeah, that's weird. It's almost like he keeps setting himself up to make a proper Michael Mann movie, and then is reminded while the cameras are rolling that actually history didn't work this way.
Well, I mean, I think that another thing that you get to enjoy in a Michael Mann film is the competence of the protagonist in action. Mm-hmm. When they're called upon to do their thing, they're going to do it very well. That's certainly true of Heat, most of his cop stuff. Collateral, you get it from the villain actually operates in that way. In this, I think there's just narrative propulsion that requires them to kind of be on the back foot most of the time, so they can't be great, because they narratively have to lose some guys in this scene. The only scene they really get to come across as competent criminals is probably the prison break.
Yeah, well, there's two prison breaks.
The best scene. Well, right, the big one in the middle with the wooden gun. That's, I think, their best scene as a unit operating. I think they still lose somebody in it.
Well, there's still that. Yeah, you're right. That is the most them as Michael Mann criminals, sort of like outwitting the cops, knowing exactly like how they need to like get through the locked doors with their hostage, like and rush it through there.
Every other one is kind of a loss in some way.
Yeah.
They fuck up every other action scene in some fashion.
But I'm not sure that they need to be fuck ups for that to happen. And so I think it's still possible narratively for them to just be up against greater forces, because they have the entire apparatus of the state working against them. And then when the the Chicago outfit turns on them as well and won't help them anymore, like they're up against it, and then they're being picked off one by one until Dillinger's the last one. I think that could work narratively in a more cohesive, tighter fashion than this movie actually presents it as.
I agree.
Yeah, I do, and I'm not entirely sure why that ball gets dropped, to be honest. I mean, structurally, I think there's reasons. I guess really what it comes down to is that the characters don't particularly work on their own, and so the rest of the film kind of collapses around that. The things that should work don't, because I don't actually know John Dillinger that well or care about him, because he's also an asshole. He's a bad guy. He's he just murders people and steals money, and it's not that romantic, really. It's kind of like, I mean, I guess that there's an element of this film which is cutting through the romance to get to the real guy. Real guy is he's a killer.
But he feels worse about it than Babyface Nelson when he kills somebody. But still not really. But that's still like, even that cuts against the scene I like of him when he's in jail talking to Bale and ask him what keeps him up at night, and he says coffee. Like, it's nothing. That's a really good counterpoint to the Heat scene. If they had let it be that, the movie be that,
Well, I mean, I think what that communicates to me is like, well, actually, he's quite a shallow man.
Yeah.
Like,
exactly.
like he's a surface level,
but he loves his woman. Don't you guys want to sit here and now talk for 15 minutes about Billy Frechette?
No.
I have a couple minutes on Billy Frechette for you, for sure.
Yeah, I did want to talk about not necessarily the character, but Cotillard, and I wanted to ask what you guys make of her performance here, because
I thought Oh, is this another phonetically learned performance right after
Yes.
Miami Vice?
That's kind of how it felt.
No, it's not. She trained herself to speak in a French, Canadian, Wisconsin, Chicago patois to play this role, and I'm like, well, that was worth the effort. Thank you. You can really tell.
That's also the kind of thing I would say if I had to give a performance in like Mandarin Chinese that I wasn't prepared for. I'd say I was actually doing some elaborate hybrid.
I just think her. I mean, I don't know how to say this without sounding really shallow in a weird way, but I don't think she looks right for this role. I think she projects such a European cosmopolitan vibe that when you're trying to present her as she's just a regular gal from Wisconsin, it's like, I don't really think I believe that.
Well, I don't know that she's really a regular gal necessarily, but
I mean, she's a coat check girl.
Yeah. I don't know. I think part of it for me is too that she always reads. This is maybe part of being French or continental, but she reads to me as a fully like adult grown up. She's always felt like she's in her late 30s to me, even like no matter across the last 20 years. And I feel like the character is supposed to be pretty young, and she reads as older to me.
I'm again, this is another performance I'm at arm's length from for sure. Not much there on the page for her. Does she have chemistry with Depp? Not really. I mean, it's not like bad. They're fine together, but I'm not invested in this relationship at all. And you know, I don't know. I don't think that they really give. I think it's the lifestyle, I guess, that appeals to both of them in a sense. Just like, well, I'd like to run from the cops and die young. That sounds good. That seems to be the basis of their relationship. It doesn't work for me.
I think as a movie, I don't think the character is well served. Now, again, this could be maybe Mann wanting to try to be where he can as faithful to real events as possible, but like she just doesn't get to share interesting scenes with anybody other than Depp. But that depends on if you consider those scenes interesting or not.
Why does she
not get a big scene with?
Yeah, her big powerhouse scene is played off of Adam Mucci, who is
fat cop,
fat blonde cop.
Yeah,
you probably know him best as the guy that Johnny Sack's daughter was marrying in the Johnny Sack's daughter wedding episode of The Sopranos.
But I mean, it's like, why does she not get a scene with Bale? Like, I mean, she does, but
he carries her out of
action. He carries her up. But that's not. There's no give and take of character happening in that moment. I mean, it's just an action. It's not characters actually relating to each other in any way. And again, the only kind of emotional moment of the movie is hers, but it's played opposite Stephen Lang, and I love Stephen Lang, but that doesn't feel like these are the characters who should be in this scene.
Stephen Lang is one of the few performances in this that I fully like and fully think works. I think he makes an enormous impact in his 5 to 10 minutes of screen time.
His 3 lines,
in large part because they gave him a scene he shouldn't.
Yeah, say, but you have to agree with Brett still that like at the end of this movie you're feeling like this is not the two people we should be ending this movie on. Absolutely,
yeah. Like it props up Stephen Lang at the expense of the second lead of the film. Like
and then because then that literally ends, and then we get that title card about. Oh, by the way, Melvin Purvis ended his own life 30 years later.
Right. I guess the other performance I like in this is Dillinger's lawyer.
Oh, yeah, great stuff.
Sort of
Peter Garrity,
cantankerous old coot. Yeah. Uh-huh.
That feels like a little bit of a cousin of some insider type courtroom business. Which I enjoy.
He feels like period Bruce McGill kind of showing up.
Yeah, he could be the grandfather of Bruce McGill's character pretty easily. If you want to do a larger Michael Mann versus Prestige show, but I like how quickly that character and Mann are able to establish that, like, yes, but all this big bluster is a put on that he's turning a switch on for the courtroom's sake. And that's all. Like, I mean,
that's a good scene.
Michael Mann himself is so like, constitutionally unshowy that it does seem like that has to be sort of a thing he brings to any big larger than life characterization, whether it's Dillinger or Ali or that lawyer. There has to be something that they turn on for dramatic effect and can kind of shut off at will.
Performative.
Yeah.
Well, that's generally true of people, so that's good. It's having the cake and eating it too, you know. Like it's having the 1930s archetypal, you know, well, stereotype character pop up, but grounding it in a way. It's like, well, that's just the thing I'm doing, you know. I'm for theatrical purpose in court, and yeah, so that's where the movie should have lived, honestly, in that performance and that scene. If it were more like that, you know, I think it would have more life to it, and it would feel more, I don't know, real to me, at least, if it had one foot in that world. I don't know. Maybe it's just then it's connected more to the thing that I'm familiar with, and I can take it a little bit more along those lines, but also appreciate that it is, you know, shot digitally and in the exact locations and with largely historical accuracy, and it would feel more like I'm seeing something closer to reality, but also more just entertaining on its own.
Yeah.
Maybe I'd like that more.
Yeah. And again, I think this is just, it's
tough. This is tougher to,
that's what I mean. Like,
to sort out than I would have thought.
And I think all this goes back to sort of my opening statement on this in some ways feels like it's right in Michael Mann's wheelhouse. In some ways it's quite wrong for him. Like there's the interesting thing of, I think there's something really interesting about the idea that for all J. Edgar Hoover's whatever and the formation of the FBI, it's sort of like, it's not until actually organized crime turns on these guys that they get shut down and edged off the board. And that feels like a very Michael Mann notion about crime and justice and how all that works. And this movie makes
kind of Butch Cassidy is. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Well, even Butch Cassidy is, I don't know. Is it criminals that do?
I feel like Butch Cassidy is the film that they're trying for here. Butch Cassidy, I think, is what they would like this film to.
Well,
feel like.
I mean, Cotillard gets that. I won't hang around to watch you die speech, right, verbatim from Butch Cassidy.
Right, but it's also kind of, you know, Butch Cassidy has sort of 60s aesthetic applied to the Old West. You know, it's not shot like a Western. It's not structured like a Western. It's trying to take larger than life characters and kind of root them in you know, a more everyday, more relatable sense. And that movie's a success, clearly. But this one, I don't think gets the alchemy correct. It definitely, you know, it moves everything about 30 years down the road in the past and in the future, and it just doesn't quite pull it off. I feel like that's what I want this to be. I don't know, even if that's like a comparison thought they had when they were making it, but
well, yeah,
I'm not sure on a tonal level if that's but I get what you're saying sort of conceptually. I think you making that comparison makes a lot of sense to me. Tonally, I would probably like this movie more if sort of it had a little bit more of a jaunty flavor and feel to it, and then sort of you bring in more of a hard-hitting ending.
Kind of like Butch Cassidy.
Ideally, you would sort of... Right, exactly.
Yep. Yeah. The ending of this, I kind of like that. I mean, it feels, I mean, like
the actual assassination sequence.
Yeah, there'd probably be a more thrilling way to present that, but it does feel like the correct ending for this film. And you know, I don't know. I kind of get a small kick out of watching Johnny Depp sort of, you know, watching Clark Gable talk about the romance of dying young, and he just sort of nods approvingly. You know, like it becomes a little sillier in these moments, a little more well, silly's not the word, a little more theatrical, a little more weighted and operatic, and that, I guess, is a tone I appreciate more at this point. You know, coming after the film that preceded it, that everything's just like, even if you don't know that John Dillinger Jazz is leaving a movie theater, you know at the end, like, it's about to happen.
Oh yeah, they're not trying to hide that ball.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that's a pretty well edited sequence. You know, it's drawn out just the right length. The build up is sort of just the right length. I think it's effective. I just wish that sort of it felt like this conclusion was earned by the rest of the movie, or maybe earned's not the right word, but it doesn't feel like this is necessarily the culmination of everything we've just seen. In a weird way, because there are just so many elements that feel like either missed opportunities or questionable choices or things that just don't really work the way we feel like they should.
Well, and maybe like it should work better, like because on paper we have seen the other like Dillinger contemporary outlaws getting whittled down, and he lost his best buddy Jason Clarke. Just something that, that I just really want to place this movie in a moment in time. This was the moment in time when you had Jason Clarke as your like stalwart second in your crew. Was a thing that Prestige Productions did. Anyway, but it feels like it should all be leading to that. And maybe there's something about it's Dillinger watching that gangster movie on screen and watching the persona he created be sort of like immortalized into American pop cultural myth as he is going to be shot dead in the street. And something about that should work, but in a way it just doesn't quite feel like we've been actually driving towards that like steadily. And man movies are really good about that though. Usually at the end of a movie usually feels like everything has been driving towards all this in one way or the other, even if it's, Dennis Haysbert struggling against his diner manager.
Sure. I think that the problem is at that point is that who cares about John Dillinger? Well, I mean, of course he's going to die. Of course he's going to die. And it's handled well, I think, but I'm not moved at all by his death. I'm just like, well, inevitable and probably appropriate, to be honest. He's a mad dog killer in a lot of ways. And, I don't need to see him get away. I kind of don't want to. And that's all fine. So there's a sense of inevitability, but not like a Greek tragedy way, just in sort of a, well, yeah, of course. I mean, of course, King Kong is going to get killed at the end. Like it's a wild beast.
Yeah, King Kong dying is a tragedy.
Sure, right. I mean, it's just the appropriate thing has happened here. The beast has been killed. Yes. So for that, I still do like it. The end of this film. I think it is the right ending for this film. I do like Marion Cotillard telling that fat guy that he's going to get killed. That's a good scene at the end.
Well, we mostly talked about this in terms of everything that doesn't work about it. For all that, this is not a good Michael Mann movie. I think it's a pretty decent movie. On it, if it were made by somebody else, I think.
I didn't find it difficult to watch. I mean, I was, again, aside from my reservations about how it looks, there are plenty of individual scenes where I was thinking to myself, this is a pretty good scene. This kind of works in individual moments and fits and starts. I'm liking sort of bits and pieces of it. I particularly like, I think one of you mentioned sort of the sound of this movie. I do like that it is not sort of conventional 1930s Tommy gunfire. Like it sounds like something, it sounds very Michael Mannish the way he treats all the gunfire in this movie. And I like that. That is a more modern quirk that I think could have still worked in a more conventional sort of 30s gangster period piece that I would have enjoyed.
I agree. I mean, the sound in the gunfire sound in specific, I think we pretty much talked about every episode of Mann-Splaining here. It's wonderful. It's kicks ass every time. I think the limitation of being about Tommy guns extends to the sound mix in this. It doesn't sound quite as powerful as say Heat, but it's distinct and it's good. It doesn't compare to the best of Man, but it's still very solid.
Yeah, that's all I'm saying. Like if this was made by some relative unknown, it would be held up as, there's a really good Johnny Depp performance and some fantastic shootouts at this in this one. It's a little overlooked gem, but we just have such higher expectations of Man.
I do find this film a little dull. I think it's a little boring, honestly. Yeah. Like I'm probably not going to watch this again. I don't know. I might, maybe one day, but it'll be a while.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm saying if somebody else made it, we'd focus more on the highlights and less on the boring parts. But because because of who Man is, and maybe because of who we are, we focused in on all the draggy parts. But those bank robberies sequences are pretty good. Yeah.
I didn't mean to to shut down all positive talk on this film. I mean, Brett, you chose this film. You were like, I want to talk about Public Enemies, and we're like, oh, excellent, please. I would like to, give you the floor at least a little to to say why this works. And you have done a great job for some of the stuff, but at the end of the day, I didn't mean to just steamroll with my dislike of it.
No, not at all. No, I mean, I love discussions like this. I mean, and again, this is not a movie that I'm uber passionate
You like redheaded stepchildren in the filmography.
I like talking about sort of the... I do, yeah. I like sort of the more unexplored corners of a director's filmography. And again, there's the personal connection. But there are, as I said, a lot of individual beats and scenes that I like quite a bit in this. I like Dillinger just walking into like the Dillinger Squad's headquarters and no one really notices that he's there. I like the scene where he's in the movie theater and the public service announcement comes up. John Dillinger could be in this theater. Look to your left. Look to your right. He could be sitting right next to you. That I
want to talk about Exhibit A of how everybody sucked at everything in the 30s. Just we sucked at even looking at the person next to us and recognizing them.
They just didn't want to rat him out. They all knew he was there.
All the guys had the same haircut. Yes, exactly.
I like both Prison Breaks. Again, we've talked about the Little Bohemia shootout. Like that's aside from the lighting, and again, the sort of the inherent limitations that I feel about the digital cinematography. The way that shootout is shot and edited, I think, is pretty terrific.
Yeah. Yes,
yeah, as you would expect.
Yeah, our expectations of him are so set so high now, and a lot of that carries over into Black Hat, which is what we're doing next. Or no, wait, we're going to stop off at Luck first, I believe.
Oh, we're doing Luck. Okay, yeah. It sure
it's
is.
more of a David Milch thing than a Michael Mann thing, but John and I also love David Milch, so we're going to indulge ourselves. But as the next proper Michael Mann joint, it's Black Hat, and that's another one where, maybe if that had been made by an unknown, people would think fairly highly of it, but as is, people think is Michael Mann losing a step.
My memory of Black Hat is that I like it a lot. I don't remember too much about it though, so I'm curious where I'll land this time.
Well, as with many Mann films, there are two cuts of that.
This is so frustrating. Yeah,
and I have no idea which one is the preferred one to seek out. This is actually the movie Public Enemies that I would like to see a different cut of to see what might be different, but for some reason,
this is a hit too.
He's not interested in giving us one. He's interested in everything else.
This is one of his more successful films. I mean, it was more expensive than he usually goes to, so I don't know. It might wash, but it made $200 million or something. It's a Johnny Depp film. You would think there would be a market for a cut of this, but I don't know. I guess it's not a beloved film.
It's not a beloved. It doesn't seem even beloved by him in that it doesn't. You're right. He doesn't seem interested in salvaging it as much as he is with Black Hat or Miami Vice, and he doesn't seem to have. When I see interviews with him that are more wide ranging, this one doesn't come up that much. He'll wax nostalgic about Ali a lot. That clearly was a personal thing to him in a way this one wasn't. And of course, Miami Vice. That one had a rocky reception, but there was entirely his vision. And this one just feels like
it's pure man.
Plus, he didn't again he likes talking about working with a lot of the other actors on Heat, on Ali, on Miami Vice, whatever. And it doesn't seem like he really liked working with any of these actors that much because he never did again with anybody that I can think of.
I mean, he's made 2 movies since this and Luck, I guess. Kind of. Yeah.
I guess John Ortiz is in this.
He's taken. That's true. Yeah. John Ortiz, he's very hot on John Ortiz for a time.
You know what? I'm coming around too. I think I love John Ortiz. Is one of my takeaways from Mann-Splaining.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm warming up to him too as I watch more of Luck.
All right, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Brett, thanks again for coming.
Yeah, we're gonna have you back again sooner.
It's a blast as always.
Than it's been, and much appreciated. Thanks for taking the bullet on Public Enemies, so to speak. You know what? No, this was interesting. It's an interesting film to talk about for sure.